I have to tell you that I have not been this excited to talk to somebody on the air, and I don't know how long. Somebody who I think in a wasteland, in just an absolute wasteland of journalism, if you can even call it that anymore. I can't even think of anybody really besides this individual that has courage to continue to do the right thing and continue to tell the story. I think Sharyl Attkisson will go down in the history books as a leader in this time period, somebody who, against all odds, stood. And if it wasn't for technology, she would be discredited and she would be out and nobody would ever know the truth. But because of technology, she had the courage to leave CBS News after fighting in the inside for a long time, leave and then start her own website and really go out and be on her own so she doesn't have to answer to anybody. With everything that we have found out from Judicial Watch this week, everything that she has done in reporting on Benghazi, and tonight on For the Record, we take the ball a little further. We have evidence now tonight that this was all about gun running. Pretty much everything that we said 2 days after this has now been verified. The story has been in production for a year, and it debuts tonight. But we wanted to have Sharyl on to talk a little bit about Benghazi and also her experience at CBS News. Sharyl, it is an honor to talk to you.
Well, that is so nice of you. Thank you very much. Nice to meet you.
Tell me, when you saw Judicial Watch come out with the story yesterday that the emails between the presidential advisor, who is a brother with the president of CBS News, how did you feel?
Well, on a competitive level, I was jealous because I have FOIA'd those same documents, and like many in the press, were just ignored. They've kind of, in my opinion, flout freedom of information law. So Judicial Watch has the muscle and the attorneys to file lawsuits. That's how they get their documents. The rest of us can't get them, and CBS wasn't willing to file a FOIA lawsuit when I was there to try to get some of these documents. But, of course, I knew about the relationship between Ben Rose, the assistant to the president, and the president of CBS News, and there had been a little bit of reporting prior to that involving Rose in some of the talking point matters. So I wasn't terribly surprised, but I was glad to finally see some written documentation that sheds a little bit more light on all of this.
So, Sharyl, does journalism even exist anymore?
I just got back from a very top-line investigative reporting conference at Berkeley, and it was very interesting because there's some just amazing reporters in print and television who attended, sort of an invitation-only event, Pulitzer Prize winners and, top people, and they really sounded the alarm over what's happening with journalism and in society at large. These are reporters that work for or used to work for the New York Times, the LA Times, a lot of these publications, and they see something, as they say, fundamentally changed in society with the freedoms, the restrictions on the press freedoms, as well as civil liberties being given up pretty much voluntarily by people.
So where
in society.
Are they? Where are they? You're the only one I have seen that has actually stood up, that is a credible journalist that says, look, here's what's going on. There's nobody else that's doing this.
Well, look at James Risen from the New York Times, who's at the conference I mentioned as a keynote speaker. He may be put in jail for not giving up information on confidential sources as the government continues their war on leaks more aggressively than ever, I think. It takes some time, and the problem is it's not just the ground-level journalists who have to try. It's the management and the managers that have to, and the show producers, be convinced that these are stories and that there's a real issue here. If not, we're sort of like screaming into the dark and nothing really comes of it.
So are you saying that they're just, I find this really hard to believe because everything was a scandal under George W. Bush. Everything. And now nothing is a scandal. So it just strikes me as this is their guy and they're not going to say anything about it. Are you saying that the management at these places really don't see that this is a problem?
I think, indeed, managers don't see a lot of these as stories, or they would put them on television, or are in some cases so ideologically conflicted that they know there's a story, but they really don't want the story out there, even when it's fairly reported, lest the public draw the wrong conclusion with their own brains about what they see and hear. That's my opinion. And I write about some of this, and I'm taking time to write a book that tries to put some of this in perspective, because it's not so easy. It's not simple as though it's just a bias by a person. It's I think a bunch of factors have come together in sort of this perfect storm to create where we are today.
Yeah, your book is called Stonewalled, and it comes out when? This fall, doesn't it?
Hopefully November, if the schedule could slide, but it's scheduled for November.
How did you have the guts to leave? And I mean, what we did is, we left Fox and started our own network, and it was insane. And you're the only one that I have seen that has taken this leap, and I hope that it's working out for you. I mean, honestly, I pray that this works out for you, and anything I can do to help you, you just let me know. I think people should, whatever they can do to help journalists who actually have the courage to tell the truth, no matter where the chips fall, good for you.
Well, thank you so much. I don't see how it doesn't work out because, A, I don't have to work. I've put myself in a position where the kids' college is paid for, and I do sympathize with other journalists that can't stand up for sometimes things that they want to because they have bills to pay and families to raise. I get that. I'm in a good position now, so I don't see a downside to anything I do, and I don't see myself in the future being beholden to a single master that gets to decide how every story goes, and more importantly, which stories don't get to see the light of day, which I think is almost a more serious issue right now.
When you had your computer turn on in the middle of the night, and they were hacking you and going in and trying to find out what you were working on. I mean, we're entering a time where, we're a long ways away from it, but we can cover this ground quickly. We're at a time that we are starting to treat journalists the way Vladimir Putin treats journalists.
Well, and you don't have to, it's not me saying this or me alone or you alone. It's as I said, a core group of top-level journalists who work at most every major publication and have sort of under the radar, as far as the public's concerned, raised objections about these things. But Jill Abramson from the New York Times has been talking about the oppression by the Obama administration of the press. Other, New York Times reporters, Washington Post, all the networks have signed on to a letter objecting to the White House over some of its press practices, which they said are worse than the previous administrations and raise constitutional questions. And I agree with all of these news media outlets that have raised these concerns. So it's not just one lone person saying so. It's a giant group of people, and I think we'll be starting to see more on this. I don't know in what forum, but I do sense that people know there's a real problem here.
I assume this is going to be in your book. Can you take us through what it felt like when you realized, holy cow, they're coming after me?
I've always had that in the back of my mind because of the kind of stories I do, although in the past I've been more concerned about certain corporations than government. But I had been warned for some time prior to the discovery of my computer intrusions that I was probably being monitored. I have very good sources in government corners, so it sounded a little paranoid to me, but these are people I respect very much. And, of course, this was way before the Snowden revelations and the Associated Press revelations, so it did sound a little funny at first, but once we were able to confirm some of what was happening, I as I've said, I'm outraged. I think people should be just standing up on buildings and screaming about this, because if someone is willing to compromise, the press, or whether they were going after sources or trying to intimidate me, these are things that are, I think, very sensitive in a society that we have today, that these attempts would be made. I'm trying not to say too much more. I'm going to let my lawyer comment on more specifics of this, hopefully in the not-too-distant future, but it's very technical, and I don't want to...
Okay, so let me change the subject here. Let me go back to Benghazi. You're investigating Benghazi, and the one thing that I said when it first happened, I said, look at how bad this must be. This is like day one. Look at how bad this must be, that the president, during a campaign, when everyone wants the president to look like he's in charge and very presidential, he immediately says, by the way, I went to bed. I didn't even know what was going on. I had a meeting at 5, and then I just disappeared.
Well, how about this? Some people have given me more perspective in the past 6 months than I really had thought of at first, some government sources. Not only was there lack of action, at least in the opinion of people who work in the government and say we could have done more that night, not only was there lack of effective action during the course of 6, 7, 8 hours, they pointed out that the Cairo embassy event had happened 8 hours plus before that, and that by the administration's own account, there was violence expected or impending at, many, many embassies and places in North Africa and this part of the country. Why were we not moving forward? It wasn't just 6 to 7 hours that we seemed fairly paralyzed by what they call the fog of war or whatever it was. It was, a huge, long amount of time. Why weren't they moving assets? It's a greater period of time that there was inaction than we originally thought. And I think, for a couple of weeks I didn't cover this story. I wasn't originally assigned, and I was brought in. CBS asked me to look into it. I think it was about 3 weeks in when it looked like there was, some more information to uncover. And just the stonewalling of basic information that should be publicly available, such as the commander-in-chief's action on a night when basically people were at war with Americans and that we were under threat in many places in the region. We don't even know what the commander-in-chief did that night. We're not allowed to know, and I think that's pretty shocking.
What do you suppose? Was he involved, or is he? Because he strikes me as a hands-off-the-wheel kind of guy, that he's just like, whatever, you guys take care of it.
I think this is my opinion, just based on experience. There were probably two narratives developing that night. One was in case there was a good scenario, perhaps the ambassador rescued in a heroic attempt, which I wish had happened. I think there are probably photographs of White House officials in the Situation Room looking commanding and in control, and that those photographs would have been released had this turned out better. That's why I've asked for the White House photographs taken that night, and the White House photo office went from telling me the very day I asked that I could have them to referring me to Josh Earnest, a press officer at the White House, saying that he had to release them. And that's been a year and a half. He won't return my calls or emails. So I think there are probably dual narratives, and the one that we got is the one in which the president were either not allowed to know what happened or he was uninvolved. Because if you're facing an election in 8 weeks and you're the politicos watching this explode on that night, you're trying to think of every possible scenario and outcome and how to make that, work for the candidate, in addition to those who are obviously trying to troubleshoot the situation, that was going on.
So we now know that we were on the wrong side, that the Muammar Gaddafi had said, I'm ready to give up. I'm just help me out here. The opposition has agreed to a replacement for me. I'm just going to leave. We just need the United States to sign off. We now know that we didn't. We now know that we were shipping guns over there. We armed Al-Qaeda. We know that Rhodes wrote the memo that said, hey, let's kind of keep focused here on this video. We don't want to talk about the failed foreign policy or anything like that. We know all of these things about Benghazi, which make it really bad for Hillary Clinton to be on the tarmac and tell the parents of those who died, we're going to get that video guy. We know that she blew up and said, what difference does it make? It makes an awful lot of difference because you were lying to us. Do we, A, know everything do we know the worst at this point? And is it even going to matter?
Well, I think in part, what I see as a strategy has been somewhat effective. They just needed to get through the election without as much of this coming out as possible. And as it has dribbled out in the year and a half since, we're getting sort of, this. I've seen this before in, different administrations and different politicians. You get a little bit numb. Little revelations come out a little bit at a time. If all that we know today had come out the week after Benghazi, it would have really been disastrous, I think.
Would have changed the election.
But, they, to some degree, I think what they've tried to have happen to make something that was, quite disastrous, incremental, and then they had time to politicize it, or at least make it appear as though it's a political issue only, and controversialize it.
Isn't this what we did?
Successful.
This is what they did with Bill Clinton. Isn't this what we learned with Bill Clinton? When Bill Clinton, the Monica Lewinsky scandal came out, everybody was shocked, and they said, "Oh, that it's not true. It couldn't happen." And then when we found out a year and a half later that it was true, everybody said it doesn't matter anyway because it all just came out in dribs and drabs.
And they say it's old news. I mean, there's certain strategies, again, that I've seen, patterns of behavior that I'm sure I'm not the only one, whereby, and again, I'm not just saying one party is worse than the other, but they have a strategy whereby information is, I think, kept close and then released in dribs and leaked, and a document here and a document there, and pretty soon you're kind of numb, and then pretty soon they say it's old news. And I think, again, to some extent that works with the public, but there is a slightly more informed group of the public that does pay attention, that isn't fooled by that type of strategy, and they're watching.
And again, Sharyl's new book is called
Stonewalled,
and you can pre-order it right now through Amazon.com. It's not released until November, but you can get an early start on that right now.
Sharyl, I again can't thank you enough for the work that you do. Your website is Sharyl Attkisson, and it's SharylAttkisson.com. And we just appreciate everything that you do and wish you all the best.
Well, thank you so much. And some of the proceeds from the book are being donated to the Breckner Freedom of Information Center, which will help on some of these issues.
Are you, can you, I said when I first started to look at this administration, this is maybe 8 months into it, I said this is going to go down as a more corrupt administration than probably the Grant administration. Can you compare what you think this is going to be looked at as history, what this time period is going to be looked at?
I can't speak to that aspect of it, but I can tell you from the standpoint of press freedoms and reportings, I think this will be seen as a historic time of restrictions and a time in which we not just lost but voluntarily relinquished a lot of our duty and our authority as watchdogs of the government.
Sharyl, thank you.
I hope we get it back. I hope we get it back.
Me too. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
You bet.